Good evening, everyone. My name is Yuval. I'm CEO of Sensics. Sensics makes professional-grade head-mounted displays, and we're also co-founders and technical leaders of OSVR. This one? We're also co-founders and technical leaders of OSVR. OSVR open source virtual reality has been launched about a year ago. So I wanted to make this a little bit more of a philosophical talk about what we've learned, what we're learning about OSVR, why we think OSVR is democratizing VR. You know, this is election season, so it's nice to speak about democracy and election and so on. And I'm not trying to sell you anything because OSVR is free. So it's free and open source, so I may try to get you to use it, but not trying to take your money. So let's sort of see a little bit how we got here. So Sensics has been around doing VR products for over a decade. Started out at Johns Hopkins University with a large grant from a car company, and then spun out of Johns Hopkins and started making headsets that initially cost $200,000 per unit. I remember sort of standing in front of my first customer and saying, yes, this is $200,000, and he agreed. So I had sort of seller's remorse. I should have asked for more. And over time, of course, it came down. By now, we have customers all over the world, defense customers, automotive, aerospace, universities, consumer electronics, medical, and so on. So we've really covered many, many aspects of VR. And at the very least, this gives us credibility, right? If it's good enough for NASA, it's going to be good enough for you. If you look at some of our product portfolios, things that we've done over the years, we've done on the top left there, that's our very first $200,000 headset. It had, I think, about 8 million pixels per eye, 150-degree field of view. So performance that's incredible, even more than a decade later. Of course, it did require a small rack of computers to power up, but it is what it is. And then some of the other things we did and we're doing, you see some of our military products at the bottom center. This is a mil-spec head-mounted displays. You can use it in a tank, and if you bang your head against the tank, nothing happens. The tank doesn't break, and the HMD doesn't break. Second from the right, you see what we called our smart goggles. This is a product that we did 4 years ago that had the integrated hand tracking, onboard Android. So really working in many aspects sort of to push the envelope of VR. And of course, when you do this for so long, you gain expertise in sensors and optics and electronics and mechanics and really everything VR. So a couple of years ago, we decided to do something, the time will tell if it was brave or stupid, right, depending on the outcome. We decided that we're not going to focus as much on the professional high-end world and work towards more consumer VR, consumer AR. Now, if you think about Oculus, for instance, they raised $100 million to take VR to the consumers before they realized that $100 million is not enough, and they needed a lot more money from Facebook to do that. So $100 million was not for us, so we decided to take a different approach. We partnered with our friends from Razer, Razer from the computers and keyboards and mice and gaming stuff. They said, Razer, we are experts in gamers. You guys, Sensics, are experts in VR. Let's make something together. So that was the first sort of rash decision that we made. The second one, which is to open source it. Open source the hardware. So we created a $300 OSVR headset. I have one here. Completely open source. You can hack it, you can change it, you can take parts, you can take designs and use in your own products, and open source software, which will be the bulk of my talk. So when you think about some of the problems we were trying to solve, I mean, imagine if your web browser, favorite web browser, only worked with a Logitech wireless mouse, nothing else. Not Microsoft, not touchpad, nothing, just a Logitech Microsoft mouse. A Logitech wireless mouse. So what would happen? So first, that would be very good for Logitech, right? Everyone that needed a browser would buy a mouse. The second thing, it wouldn't be that good for the browsers because not everyone wants to or can afford or has access to that particular mouse. And it certainly wouldn't be good for the users because they want choice. They want to be able to select their computer and monitor and mouse and keyboard and many other things. So that's one thing that we sort of said, okay, on the desktop, you have a lot of choice, you have a lot of interoperability. What do we do on VR to solve that? The second problem, which now some of you may be developing some VR device, maybe a gesture engine, maybe an eye tracker, maybe an interaction device. And so the key problem is how do you get content? How do you get someone to write stuff for your device? Otherwise, it's no good. I mean, if it's a device and has only one game, that's not going to be good in the long term. And the third thing, if you are specialized in one particular area, say eye tracking, and you still want everything else that goes with it, how do you get that expertise? How do you get these capabilities quickly? So let's take a step back and look a little bit at what we call the VR stack. And you know, with apologies to Copernicus, we actually do have the HMDs at the center of the world. And so you say, well, there's an HMD, right? A goggle, that's what starts the VR experience. Now, right around it, there's a whole bunch of sensors that make it interesting. So it could be a head orientation tracker or an eye tracker or something that senses your hand motion, a depth camera, a skeleton. You know, of course, it could be also an output device. You may be sitting on some motion chair that would move when the game starts happening. And then on the outside, there's a game or application, and most of these are written on Unity or Unreal or CryEngine or Steam or and so on and so on. And what we felt that was missing is this middleware layer that basically creates an abstraction, meaning that the web browser, in my previous example, doesn't have to worry about specifically how Logitech wants the data from their mouse to come, but says, I work with a mouse, or more generally, I work with a pointing device. And so when you buy a new printer today, you plug it into your Mac or your Windows machine, and it says, oh, here's a new printer. I know what a printer is. I'll go get the driver, and I'm all set. I don't need to upgrade my word processor to use my new printer. Well, OSVR allows you to do that for VR display devices, for VR input devices, for VR output devices. So OSVR has sort of two parts. One is the open source hardware that I'll spend less time about. You know, it's available today, HD 1080, OLED screen, low persistence, positional tracking, high quality optics, expandable, hackable, open source. We'll put that aside. And then the open source software, which is sort of sometimes the overlooked portion of OSVR, but in my opinion, the one that's ultimately more valuable and more interesting. So what is the OSVR software? Well, I think that's going to be the last slide with the big words. You know, multi-platform, meaning that it can run on Linux and Android and Windows and Mac and so on. Standardized interface to devices. So I don't care who makes the motion tracker, it's a motion tracker. I don't care who makes the eye tracker, it's an eye tracker. A set of high-performance rendering utilities. So if you want to write, you have your own game engine and you need all these buzzwords, direct render, time warp, distortion correction, you know, we've got that covered. Highly extensible, and most important, it's free and open source. You can go today to osvr.github.io and download everything, including source code, and you can do whatever you want with it. You could modify it, and when you modify it, you could just keep the modification for yourself, or you can contribute it back to the community for the good of the whole. So here is sort of a graphical representation of the problem that OSVR solves. Right before OSVR, you said, well, I've got all these HMDs, these yellow circles, you know, an Oculus and a Sensics and an OSVR unit and what have you. I've got all these tracking systems, you know, Lighthouse, 6 Sense, Wiimote, Kinect. I got eye trackers, I got gestures, and I got all these game engines. So before OSVR, you sort of had to create a driver from one to the other. If you were making a new device, you had to create all these drivers. If you wanted to write a game that uses one of these devices, you had to choose which one. We believe in democracy. We don't think that someone in Menlo Park or in Seattle or in Columbia, Maryland, where we are, should make the choice for you. We think that you should be able to choose which HMD you want to use, which peripherals, depending which computer, strong, weak, expensive, inexpensive, depending on all the reasons that there's not just a single car out there. There are many different types of cars. So after OSVR, there is a middleware layer. So essentially, if you have a new eye tracker, all you need to do is create one driver, and what we call a plugin to OSVR, and then all these games, all these engines already know what to do with you because they understand what an eye tracker is. So that's good for hardware manufacturers because they can get content out to the market. That's good for content providers. So if I'm Jaunt, I don't want to create 100 different versions of my player. I want to be able to create a few and have it support today's HMDs and tomorrow's HMDs. And by the way, it's not about just the playing. I want it to interact with the content. There are 200 different interaction devices, and guess what? By next year, there'll be twice that. So just to give you a rundown, we support over 200 devices today, a whole bunch of game engines, a whole bunch of operating systems, and so on. So one of the things that we were sort of worried about or unsure when we started this is what's going to be the reaction. So if I go to two competing eye tracker companies, will they want to will they want to cooperate in building a standard, or will they say, no, I'm just going to do my thing? And surprisingly, and we were glad to see it, they all wanted to work together. They understood that there is a standard for eye trackers, everyone wins because it's going to be easier for application developers to write to an eye tracker. So they didn't mind working together to create a standard and say, okay, we're going to interface to this standard and everything else from our layer above will be the same. So in terms of devices that OSVR supports, there are trackers and eye trackers and displays and cameras and skeletons and a whole bunch of other stuff. So in sort of the philosophical part of the discussion, this is sort of caught on. On the left, you see the number of partners in the year that since we launched OSVR. We have over 300 partners, including Intel and Ubisoft and Nod and Leap and Vuzix and many others. So we must be doing something right. But here are sort of the more interesting questions. How does one make money from free and open source, right? And then how do we get more partners on board? Who is contributing to the effort, and why are they contributing? So I think the second question we pretty much answered. People understand that standards, even de facto standards, are a good thing, that they can grow the industry. I mean, right now, it's not I'm Ford and you're Chevy, and if I want to grow my market, I have to take customers from you. I mean, the whole VR market combined may be very huge one day, but right now it's very small. So people working together to grow the market, make it easier for consumers, make it easier for developers, makes a lot of sense for everyone. Who are the contributors? We sort of see two types of contributors. One is just the companies, right? Leap Motion wanted to be supported in OSVR, so they invested time and their money to create an OSVR plugin. So now everyone can use Leap Motion in a standardized way. Same thing with other vendors. So that's sort of the classic. A vendor wants to get supported because they see the benefit. But the fun thing is all the VR enthusiasts, the individual contributors. So let me tell you a story just to illustrate that. One day I get a call from Mozilla, and they say, Oculus is no longer supporting Mac. A lot of Mozilla users use Mac. What are you doing about VR for OS X? And we said, look, OSVR is written to be multi-platform, is written to be compatible, is written to be able to compile on many different platforms, but we just haven't done it yet. We haven't tested it on Mac. But let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to sit down with our engineering team, and we're going to create a list, sort of a laundry list, of the things that need to happen to verify that Mac support is happening. So we created that list. I put it on my blog, vrguy.net, and Mozilla was kind enough to promote it on a tweet. And guess what? 2 weeks later, we had the first Mac release for OS X, because enough people in the community jumped on board and say, yeah, this is a great idea, we're going to do it. So we have people from all over the world contributing, fixing bugs, making suggestions. We just sent out a developer survey saying, look, we're the core team. What do you want us to do next? Do you want us to support Lighthouse? Do you want us to make a GUI to make it easier? Do you want us to make sure it runs really well on Linux? You know, what are your priorities? We got feedback. And so the involvement of the community has been very, very gratifying and very useful in that regard. So we spoke about contributors to OSVR, people who sort of care, and of course, how does one make money? So we're not 100% sure yet. Of course, we continue to make money on our professional products, you know, selling to the military, selling to universities, and so on. But now we sort of have opened 2 additional avenues, and this is speaking as Sensics rather than sort of the OSVR effort. So one thing that happens is that people come to us and say, oh, you designed a lot of stuff for OSVR, you maintain the software, you manage the software development. We need help, you know, we need a driver, we need consulting, we need to optimize it for this and that platform. So there's certainly some services revenues that we never had before that comes by virtue of OSVR. The second thing is people come and say, I like the headset, but I needed to do something slightly different. So for instance, I want to use it in a roller coaster. I want to use it in an arcade. And you know, it's really good, but in arcade, I need it to be more durable so that if someone accidentally or intentionally drops it, it doesn't break. I need it to be easy to clean, so you don't have to worry how much the person before you sweated or what he has on his hair and so on. So very easy to clean. Something that wouldn't get damaged, and a couple of other features. So we're able to take the mass-produced OSVR components and then customize them, which we sort of have been doing forever on higher-end units, to the specific needs of particular customers. And it could be, again, it could be arcades, it could be medical, it could be even military. We have some of our military customers that no longer wish to pay, you know, $50,000 for a head-mounted display, but they're willing to pay $5,000 if they can get ruggedization and other features that they care about. So we spoke about, you know, the process of open source. It certainly gained us a lot of visibility. You know, we think that in our first year and, you know, certainly in this upcoming year, one of our goals is going to continue to just expand the reach of the platform, to get more and more devices supported on it. So for instance, in a couple of weeks, we'll have HTC Vive support. And what does that mean? That means that someone can write an experience, say in Unity, using OSVR, and then in runtime, just like in runtime you say, oh, I want to print on the Epson printer, I want to print on the HP printer, you don't have to recompile your word processor. In runtime, you could say, I want it to run on the OSVR unit, I want to run on Oculus, I want to run on HTC, I want to run on something else. You know, we've got lots of new HMD manufacturers writing drivers for OSVR because they see that value. And so we're going to be able to come to developers and say, look, instead of creating multiple versions of the same code, just create one version and it's going to run on all the devices you care about today, and it's going to run on all the devices you care about tomorrow, because you'll need the equivalent of a printer driver to make that happen. So we think that by just getting a lot of broad adoption, as many operating systems as we can, help as many people get their crazy peripherals on, then if OSVR gets adopted increasingly widely, then good things will happen. It will open up additional opportunities for us to say, now we can turn this into more revenue than just services and customization. So it's a little bit of a leap of faith, you know, sort of jumping into the pool, not 100% sure if the pool is filled with water and to what level. But it's been incredibly fun. We do feel the love of the community in terms of the democracy aspect. Oh, I could use my Wiimote. Okay, yeah, yes, you can. We had a guy in France who took a Gear VR and said, I need positional tracking on the Gear VR, and I've got this room scale system that I bought a while ago. So I'm going to take OSVR server, basically a software component, run it on Gear VR, and use that to access that system. We've got people who make public attractions for VR, who have more sophisticated, more complex systems, sometimes custom HMDs, sometimes sophisticated wide tracking systems, all come and say, oh, this is a great infrastructure to get our games on it. And you know, I thought I knew the VR market because I've been doing it for 10 years. And you know, to see this kind of crowd is still a little bit surreal, because it used to be that we would go to VR trade shows and all 6 of us, you know, would reserve a table for a dinner at the end of the show, right? As hi Michael, how this, and that was that. And now we've got, you know, hundreds of people just in New York coming to hear VR. But we thought we knew VR, but then we got all these contributions, all this innovation coming from all over the world, from New Zealand and from Europe and from South America and of course from the US, and it's really amazing. So what's going to happen this month? We are continuing to improve the platform. You know, I mentioned certainly working on the HTC support. We are working on making it increasingly easier for game developers to just click a button and publish to OSVR. People are asking us to do things to improve rendering, like foveated rendering or multi-resolution rendering, which means that you don't have to render the image at the same resolution at all parts of the image. And one reason is that it allows you to run OSVR on lower-end PCs. No one, I mean, today there's a $15 Google Cardboard, and then there's $1,500 to buy a top-of-the-line computer. What if I bought a computer a year ago for $800 and I really like it, I don't feel like spending another $1,000? I want to use that for every man's VR. So with that, I invite you, of course, to visit osvr.org. I'm VR Guy at Sensics. You know, just a sign that I was in this industry forever, because VR Guy or vrguy.net was available for me. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We ran a bit long, so the questions there, I think. New hardware platforms coming out, so I see some people being a little bit hesitant to provide the capability of integrating with open source software. You mentioned eye tracking. So there's this company, iFluence, which is a very sophisticated eye tracking method. I struggle with seeing how they would integrate their system into an open source platform. Those capabilities are only very unique to them.
So we don't need to open source their algorithms. So when Leap Motion created a plugin for OSVR, they didn't open source the hand tracking algorithms. But what they did is they said, okay, a Leap Motion device is a camera and a depth map, and it's something that tells you what we call the skeleton, so basically joints and bones and their position. And here's the interface how we report them. So so OSVR allows you to take closed source components and create an open source interface for them. So with iFluence, or with iTribe, or SMI, or Tobii, or Ergoneers, or all the eye tracking vendors that we know and love, they can all work to a same common interface, and that's going to allow people to start having more interaction with virtual characters. It's going to allow people to have foveated rendering. So truly everyone benefits from working together and allowing the customers, the democracy, allowing the customers to choose what they want to run and what they want to run it on.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.